This is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello there, I'm Paul Barber. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Russia launches a deadly wave of missile attacks across Ukraine. At least 17 people are killed in one apartment block. Airstrikes and tank fire. Sudan's capital is rocked by violence, despite a renewed ceasefire between the two warring factions. 7 hours of secret testimony. Former US Vice President Mike Pence appears before a grand jury investigating Donald Trump. And breaking heat records. Spain swelters in summer temperatures as the government scrambles to help the most vulnerable. Russia has launched a deadly wave of missile attacks across Ukraine in the most intense aerial bombing in nearly 2 months. At least 17 people, including 3 children, have been killed in the town of Uman, where firefighters have been battling a blaze at an apartment block. On the outskirts of Dnipro, a mother and her young child were killed. Moscow denies deliberately targeting civilians, but Kiev says strikes on cities far from the front lines are war crimes. Our correspondent Shelby Wada is in Kiev now for us. Shelby, what is the latest on these Russian attacks?
Well, as Ukrainians were going to sleep last night, messages started coming through on local Telegram channels informing Ukrainians to sort of anticipate a Russian strike. And that's because Russian military activity was being detected, particularly Russian warplanes being airborne. And then a few hours later, around 4 a.m., air raid sirens did start calling out, and they were activated across all of Ukraine. And that's because Russia was launching cruise missiles and drones at numerous Ukrainian cities. The latest reports we are hearing on figures: 18 people have been killed, including children, as you mentioned, and numerous others are wounded. Now, Ukrainian Air Force said that they shot down and intercepted 21 out of 23 of these missiles. They destroyed 2 drones, but the remaining missiles that got through hit civilian infrastructure and a warehouse. Expanding on the locations where these strikes happened, as you mentioned, Paul, in the city of Uman in central Ukraine. An apartment complex was hit there, killing civilians, including children. We know that one of those was 10 years old. Otherwise, in the east of Ukraine, in the city of Dnipro, more civilians killed in a strike there, including a 2-year-old child. And here in Kyiv, the nation's capital, all incoming air targets were destroyed, but fragments of a missile that were intercepted did hit a residential building, which also injured a child here in the Kyiv region. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that people were still trapped under the rubble at some of these sites, so that number could increase. But otherwise, really, this attack just comes as Ukraine has continued to call for additional air defense support to try and protect Ukrainian civilians and cities from Russian strikes. Paul.
So, Shelby, they're looking for more supplies. The Ukrainians were able to intercept this incoming fire into Kiev. What is the latest on the counteroffensive then? How's that progressing?
So we heard today from Ukraine's Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov say that Ukraine's military was ready for its counteroffensive. He did not give a date as to when it would begin, but he said that Ukraine's military was concluding its preparations. As you mentioned, Ukraine had been waiting on military equipment and supplies from NATO partners and Western allies, along with favorable weather conditions. But we heard yesterday from NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg in Brussels saying that 98% of all promised combat vehicles had been delivered to Ukraine. As you can see behind me now, it's starting to warm up in Ukraine in regards to springtime. So really, it's just a matter of timing as to when Ukrainian command will give the all clear and launch their counteroffensive as they're going to try and repel Russian forces from the east and south of Ukraine, Paul.
Shelby, many thanks indeed for that update. Shelby Wilder in Kiev there. Well, that's the view from Ukraine. Let's get the latest now from Russia and our correspondent in Moscow, Stuart Smith. Stuart, has the Russian Defence Ministry commented on these latest attacks yet?
Yes, it has. First of all, a few hours after the strikes, the Russian Defense Ministry on its social media channels posted a picture with a caption in Russian that said, quote, "right on target." And then a few hours later, during Friday, the usual spokesman for the Russian Ministry of Defense explained what that target was. It claims that it was attempting to strike areas where reserve forces were gathering within Ukraine, reserves on their way to the front line, the Russian Ministry of Defense says. It then claims that all of its targets were successfully hit and that prevented these advancing enemy reserves from getting to where they were heading. The same day, on Friday, Russia claims Ukrainian shelling killed 7 civilians when a rocket hit a minibus in the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. That's been confirmed by the governor there.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, thank you very much indeed. Our other top story, Sudan's capital Khartoum has been rocked by airstrikes and tank fire despite a renewed ceasefire between the two warring factions. Both the army and the RSF paramilitary group have accused each other of breaking the truce. A partial pause over the last 3 days has allowed tens of thousands of people to flee the country, while governments across the world send planes to evacuate nationals. The situation for people remaining, though, is said to be desperate. Our correspondent Naba Mohideen is in the city of Madani, around 130 kilometres from the capital, Khartoum. Naba, how bad is the fighting despite this renewed ceasefire?
Hi, Jamie. The fighting is really bad and it's impacting everything, the services, people movement, the livelihoods and lives of Sudanese people who are still in the capital and who are fleeing from the capital. It's really bad, and this morning many parts of the capital Khartoum saw fierce clashes, specifically Omdurman, which is in the triangle capital of Khartoum, and it contains main camps of the military and RSF, and also northern Khartoum Bahri. Right now it's under fire, and the fighting is really heavy on the streets of the northern Khartoum, in the capital Khartoum, in Bahri specifically, and eastern Nile city also witnessed heavy fighting with airstrikes, bombs, explosions. And a lot of houses were collapsed. Many people got wounded this morning. So the fighting has never stopped despite the ceasefire or the calls for respecting the ceasefire. The fighting is still going on, and every hour we have updated news and verified ones about many neighborhoods being bombed, looted, or collapsed. So the fighting is still really bad.
It's a really desperate situation. Many Sudanese people trying to leave the country. How difficult is that process?
The difficulty about leaving the country, it varies from a point to point. The first difficulty people are facing right now is getting out of Khartoum during a failing ceasefire and during the heavy weapons and the renewed fighting all the time. Once people get out of Khartoum, the tickets are very expensive. Buses tickets are very expensive. There is fuel crisis. There is no water for the long routes. So people are suffering to get out from the capital, even if they went safely in large groups. The other problem is the borders with many countries right now are full of people. The Egyptian borders has, right now, it have more than 10,500 Sudanese people up to yesterday. They are waiting to finish their procedures in order to be able to get inside Egypt. A lot of people already they entered Egypt, but a lot of people are still waiting. The Ethiopian borders are also full. South Sudanese borders are full. And the services in the routes in the cities like Madani City, where I'm staying right now, are really deteriorating. There is power shortages, power outages and water shortages, and a scarcity of food, water, medicine, and everything. So the situation is really dire everywhere in the capital, or if you want to go out of the capital, in the borders, the situation is really bad.
Naba Mohiuddin in Madani in Sudan, thank you. Well, Musab Ibrahim is among those who are still stuck in Sudan's capital, Khartoum. He told us how people remaining in the country are struggling to find essential supplies. Because of where he is, the audio on his voice isn't perfect, but we wanted to bring you his story.
Electricity for 7 hours. We cut it from the early morning, and there is no water for 2 days now. We don't have water. And the problem is the evacuate for people is going perfectly for foreigners. And there is a lot of Sudanese migrate from Sudan to other neighbor countries, Egypt and Ethiopia, and going to their destinations. It's very difficult to live, and there is an oil problem too. And it's very difficult to get access to any government office or being connected to. And all banks are closed, people are suffering, and we have cash problems, and that's effect on the price. The price for food has become a double now, due to there's no cashes. And some banks, apps are not working because there is no internet connection. It's a situation is going to get calm in Khartoum. Life is trying getting back slowly, but the problem people are not trying to reach any kind of government access or website. There's no any services, and people still frustrated, and clashes between the army and the paramilitary still continue in many different places. In downtown Khartoum. Yes, they renew ceasefire every 2 days, but no one keep his weapon on. There's still clashes, and they still raised up the escalation. But until now, it's calm, but we don't know about tomorrow.
Musab Ibrahim in Khartoum there. You're watching CGTN, still to come. The testimony Donald Trump tried to block. Former US Vice President Mike Pence appears before a grand jury over his former boss's attempts to overturn the election.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Hello there, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Russia launches a deadly wave of missile attacks across Ukraine. At least 17 people are killed in one apartment block. Our other headlines: airstrikes and tank fire. Sudan's capital is rocked by violence despite a renewed ceasefire between the two warring factions. Former US Vice President Mike Pence has appeared before a grand jury investigating Donald Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election. US media reported that he was inside the courthouse for more than 7 hours. Trump had tried to block Pence from testifying, but he lost that appeal on Wednesday. Our correspondent John Terrett is live in New York. Hi there, John. What is the importance of this?
Paul, good morning. Amid all the noise that surrounds what we now know to be January the 6th, 2021, I think this is a very significant event indeed, because Mike Pence becomes the first Vice President of the United States to testify in a criminal probe against his boss about what happened during their time in the White House. He's also the first Vice President to potentially run against that boss, whom he has now testified against. That assumes that Mike Pence will run in the 2024 election. All the signs are that he will give it a go. Now, as you say, it is reported here that he testified somewhere between 5 and 7 hours in a courthouse in Washington, D.C. on Thursday. This was a criminal probe. He was addressing a grand jury put together by a special prosecutor. And the one question they're trying to get to the bottom of, was there a plot in the White House to overturn the November 2020 election? Was there a plot? Now, Mike Pence prepared for weeks for this. He did not just do it on the fly. He's been working with his lawyers for a very long time, going through memos to see what he wrote, to see what he received, which meetings he attended, what was said at those meetings. Now, there is no word about what he actually said during testimony yesterday. That will be up to the special prosecutor to either release that information or not, or to bring charges or not. In the meantime, President Trump, commenting within the last 24 hours about Mike Pence's appearance, said that he has no idea what he said, but he has great confidence in him. Paul.
OK, John, and what could become of Pence's evidence?
Well, the thing about Mike Pence is that he is central to the build-up to what we now know to be January the 6th, 2021. And as you said quite correctly in the intro, President Trump himself lost a bid in the courts on Wednesday to prevent his former vice president from testifying. Now, what we know to be true is that President Trump did pressure Mike Pence. It's not illegal to pressure anybody, but he did pressure him to unlawfully disregard the Electoral College votes. Now, it's a bit complicated, but in America, in a presidential, the people vote, and then the Electoral College collate their votes state by state and present those to the Congress, and the Congress ratifies them, and that's how the winner actually becomes the president. That was supposed to happen on January the 6th, when we saw the rioting at the Capitol. Well, there was pressure for Mike Pence to disregard the age-old traditional system. Also, Mike Pence attended many White House meetings after the election and before January the 6th, at which dissatisfaction with the election of Joe Biden was discussed many times. Finally, this is, I think, a situation that has deep constitutional consequences. What it says is that nobody, no matter how high up in the American government system you get, vice president or even president, you're still held accountable by the courts. Back in the late 1700s, when George Washington appointed John Adams as the first vice president, it was a purely ceremonial role. Washington never consulted him over anything. He didn't have anywhere to live in Washington, D.C. And it stayed that way until Jimmy Carter in the 1970s. These days, it's a key political role in Washington, D.C., but it still proves that you can still be hauled before a court if necessary in this country. Finally, President Trump remains the front runner for 2024, easily defeating any Republican rivals, and even at the moment, according to the polls, beating President Biden by some 7 points. Paul?
John Terrett in New York, thank you. 2 months after devastating earthquakes rocked Turkey, some families are still searching for their loved ones. According to Turkish authorities, there are still around 1,000 bodies which have yet to be identified. Families have been visiting hospitals and mass graves. Our correspondent Natalie Carney reports.
Murat Usun lost his brother and sister-in-law when the 6-story building they were living in with their 2 sons collapsed. Ever since, Murat has been desperately searching hospitals, graveyards and social media for his missing nephews, 13-year-old Ismet and 9-year-old Saraç.
I officially declared them missing. We went to the prosecutor's office with my father to give a DNA sample. Thankfully, we also opened the tomb and took a sample of my brother's DNA. We are now awaiting on the results. We have not received any information about their whereabouts from any authority.
They all lived in the city of Nurdağ, one of the worst affected areas. Well over 5% of the population died here. Today, the rubble continues to be cleared away, but missing posters still hang from destroyed buildings.
I'd like to know if they are dead or alive. I think this is my personal right. I want to have my own funeral for them.
Ercan Güleç, 24-year-old son Mustafa, has also not been seen since the building he lived in the city of Iskenderun came crashing down.
My other children, my wife, we all worked together digging for 9 days to remove the wreckage. We couldn't find the boy in the wreckage. Friends in other apartments said that he went by ambulance, but we searched hospitals. We visited approximately 22 cities. We could not find him in any hospital.
They too have provided DNA samples, but have not heard anything back. According to forensic scientists, close to 3 months on, and some 1,000 bodies, including children, are still without identities.
First of all, the medical identity is defined: age, height, hair colour, gender, eye colour of the person. Then the medical features on their body, surgical scars, birthmarks, etc. are looked at. The crime scene investigation takes fingerprints.
These identifying markers are then checked against a registry of information provided by searching family members.
These burial grounds have come to be known as the graveyard of the unidentified. Wooden slabs with numbers written on them mark the graves of those who lost their lives in February's earthquakes, but have not yet been identified.
If no match was made, unidentified bodies were buried within 24 hours.
All may not be identified. Undocumented immigrants are hard to find if their relatives don't provide DNA samples, or it is not possible for those who are Turkish citizens and have no relatives to match their DNA. I don't know how much, but some will remain anonymous.
But for the surviving family members still searching, they will not allow that to happen. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Southern Turkey.
The British government has given Northern Ireland 2 years to repay money that it overspent last year and warned of difficult decisions with no increase in funding this year. Trade between the UK and Northern Ireland has been a political headache since Brexit. The Republic of Ireland, which shares a border with Northern Ireland, remains part of the European Union. However, hopes were buoyed by a new agreement reached in February. Our correspondent, Peter Oliver, has been talking to businesses about that new deal.
The Windsor Framework is designed to streamline the documentation for goods that are imported from Great Britain to Northern Ireland that will stay in Northern Ireland by introducing green and red lanes. Green if it stays in the north, red if it goes into the Republic and the European single market. Garden centres are one of those industries that had been struggling under the rules of the post-Brexit Northern Ireland Protocol. When it comes to looking at the problems businesses like this one have faced because of Brexit, you can't go much further than the humble seed potato. Previously, these, grown in the UK mainland, would have been imported directly here to the garden centre in Belfast. However, now they have to go from where they're grown first to the Netherlands, then to the Republic of Ireland before coming north. All that means is more costs for retailers, which are in turn passed on to consumers. Here, the hope is that the Windsor Framework will allow them to speed up supply chains from Great Britain and reduce costs.
For us to order just anything, garden furniture, barbecues, plant sundries, all coming from England, the big issue for us has been it's been sort of ordering on a Monday and you might see those products maybe in 2 to 3 weeks' time. Before Brexit, it was more like a 5-day delivery service, so we're really hoping that if we have these green lanes that they talk about, things will become much easier. We can go back to just ordering on a Monday for delivery for a Friday, which again means as a weather-dependent business, we can get the stock in when we need it, when the weather's good.
The Windsor Framework is far from a cure-all for the trade issues brought about by Brexit. Goods coming into Northern Ireland from Great Britain intended to remain here will have to be clearly labelled as so. Those that represent retailers in Northern Ireland told me that the plans to get this done by October of this year are just not feasible. The process gets complex as labelling has to be done for both the EU single market and the UK internal market.
Under the framework, the labelling of products that for Northern Ireland needs to come in sooner. That's coming under EU legislation, and that GB would have to be labelled, and that would be through Westminster legislation. And if the suppliers in GB feel that they don't need to do the GB thing, or that it won't be implemented, then yes, they're going to take a look at Northern Ireland market and say it just isn't worth the candle.
That sentiment has been borne out in some recent polling by the Haulage Trade Association Logistics UK of their members. While 79% said they welcomed the certainty that the new trading agreement will bring to their business, only 40% of businesses surveyed in Great Britain confirmed their intention to re-establish trading links with Northern Ireland. The Windsor framework was greeted with much fanfare, potentially solving many trade issues. Only as it goes into action will we see what type of impact it has, and if in trying to solve trade and indirect tax issues under the Northern Ireland Protocol, whether it ends up creating new issues over labelling. Peter Oliver, CGTN, Belfast.
Sri Lanka's central bank predicts the economy will shrink by 2% this year in its latest report, detailing the country's worst economic crisis in 70 years. The bank outlined how wages last year failed to keep up with the cost of living, with people struggling to pay for food, fuel, transportation and utilities. Inflation reached almost 70% in September. However, the economy is expected to grow by 3.3% next year. Accepting migrants would be a true sign of Christianity. That was the message from Pope Francis to Hungary and its Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. The pontiff made the comments during a speech to government leaders, including Orban, at the start of his visit to the country. Budapest has been criticised for building a steel border fence to exclude migrants. Emergency teams will be deployed a month earlier than normal in France at the start of June. Officials say the unusually dry winter has increased the chances of premature and more intense wildfire. France has just seen its first wildfire of the year, with hundreds of hectares of scorched earth near the border with Spain. Meanwhile, Spain itself is also suffering its first major heat wave of the year, months earlier than usual. Regions in the south of the country have been badly hit, and records are already being broken. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports.
Summer has come early to Spain. Too early. Temperatures normally recorded at the height of summer are now arriving in spring. In the last 24 hours, the official weather station at Cordoba hit 38.8 degrees. That is the highest temperature ever recorded on mainland Spain for the month of April. Here in Malaga, the regional government has promised to help the most vulnerable members of the community by pledging to create climate refuges across the city. That would include shaded areas, more trees and natural canopies, plus better water access for the public.
It's too hot for this time of year. In the summer, we'll die from the heat.
Tomorrow is meant to be between 37 and 38 degrees, and that's not normal, even for the south of Spain. And I'm worried for the future, and I think that the climate change really quick.
The heat wave has been caused by hot air travelling up from Africa, which has pushed the seasonal averages 10 to 12 degrees higher than usual. Last year was the hottest year on record in Spain, and this year could bring yet another unwanted milestone as the country faces another sweltering summer that has started much earlier than expected. Ken Brown, CGTN, Malaga.
And the headlines again. Russia launches a deadly wave of missile attacks across Ukraine. At least 17 people are killed in one apartment block. Airstrikes and tank fire. Sudan's capital is rocked by violence despite a renewed ceasefire between the two warring factions. And 7 hours of secret testimony. Former US Vice President Mike Pence appears before a grand jury investigating Donald Trump. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We'll have more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. Bye for now.